Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your 10-minute weekly escape from the world to think about ancient warfare. What I do, of course, is you send in questions, you ask a question via postcard, via email, you comment on a previous YouTube video or podcast, and I will attempt to answer the question if I think I can. And of course, we can also get questions from patrons. So on Patreon, you can back us at one of three different levels. There is Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. Legio, no wait, that's the name of the unit. Now, today's question is from Valentine, and he says, I have just finished rereading your excellent article, thank you, Men You Can Trust in Volume 16.6 of Ancient Warfare. A question arose in my mind that you may be able to answer. With the bulk of Alexander's army in Asia, and especially India, why did no foreign invader seek to take advantage of the situation by invading parts of Macedonia? Fascinating. And of course, there are some rebellions. There's a rebellion in Sparta in 331 BC that fails. And of course, as soon as Alexander dies in 323 BC, there's a launch by the remaining Greek states in the Lamian War to try and reassert their independence. That's the Athenians, several cities in the Peloponnese, and the Aetolian League, and the Thessalians, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, I think the reason that those events occur, there's also a group of Greek settlers in Bactria and Sogdiana in 325 BC who, on a false rumor of Alexander's death, decide they've had enough and they decide to march home. Diodorus says they all get massacred, but Curtius Rufus tells us they all successfully get home eventually. Now, one of the reasons for that, of course, is that the dissatisfaction is brewing, and there's lots of evidence of that. But they're not willing to do anything while Alexander's alive. And as soon as Alexander is dead, whether that's a false rumor of his death or the reality, as of course happens eventually in 323, I think what happens, of course, is you get the idea that they're afraid to do something while Alexander's alive. And when he's gone, they aren't. And that's what happens eventually. Now, in that case, why aren't they willing to try and overthrow the government of Alexander in absentia, especially when he's far away in Babylon or even further afield in what is now India? And I think, firstly, the example that he sets of Thebes in 335 BC is the one that really makes anyone question whether it's a good idea. Because obviously he razes the city of Thebes to the ground, and that is, a very storied and ancient Greek city that he basically eliminates from the face of the earth. That obviously is a very worrying precedent to set, obviously something that happens again under the Romans with Carthage in 146 BC, and sets a really good example. Don't go against me, I will wipe you from the face of the earth. Otherwise, you've got the Illyrians and the Paeonians as the son of Olympias, who's a Molossian from Epirus, though they're on his side. But I think what you've got, of course, in Alexander's army with the Thessalian cavalry and the Illyrian troops is probably some form of hostage. I don't think any source explicitly tells us so, but I would imagine that the young sons of the nobility and the kings of the Paeonians and the Illyrians with Alexander in his cavalry forces. And therefore, if any word of rebellion reaches him, he's going to say, well, say goodbye to your young people. So that's how the hostage system works in the ancient world. You guarantee behavior by surrendering your young people to another power. And so in that sense, I think that there is an inherent threat. And so they remain well behaved. The Greek cities are agitating. Obviously, there are some laws that are dictated by Alexander where he is in the Persian Empire, the former Persian Empire, such as the exiles decree, which is that 20,000 exiles will be accepted back into their home cities, and they will have their property restored to them. That's in 334, I think it's maybe earlier. No, maybe later. Anyway, when that decree comes, of course, the Greek cities are upset because it essentially means the undesired political opposition that they have exiled is allowed back in and given all their property. Perhaps in some cases, those are in fact pro-Macedonian nobility and individuals. So, in a way, there's a sort of a deliberate destabilizing of the case. Now, there is a caveat, of course, to what I'm just said about the idea that maybe the Thessalians are going to guarantee their safety, and that is in the Lamian War. The Thessalian cavalry is enlisted by the Macedonian generals, but then they betray him. Is it the Battle of Mount Conon? No, Orthus, I'm not sure which battle. They betray him and win victory for the Athenian League. So, in that sense, though, it looks as if the rebellion was planned before Alexander dies in 323. But of course, as soon as he dies in June 323, the rebellion is launched with full throttle, and the wars generally are being fought by the end of that year. So sort of from September onwards, they're fighting those wars, those battles. So I think in that sense, the Thessalians learning that Alexander is dead and that therefore that threat is gone. And of course, the other thing is that Alexander had shown at Thebes that he was willing to follow through on such a drastic measure as razing Thebes. Whoever takes over from Alexander, Perdiccas or whoever, isn't necessarily going to be as harsh. And perhaps there's some wiggle room to negotiate. So I think that's why there's the wait until he's, yes, he's actually dead. And so the Thessalians, make their choice as well, and they join the alliance, although they eventually get defeated in the Lamian War by 321 BC. So I think in that sense, why the forces that are with Alexander don't rebel is that they've been shown what will happen if they do, and they've also probably got the hostages are with them. There's enough pro-Macedonian politicians in Greece and contingents within parts of Alexander's empire that will inform and maybe even can hold the fort if things go badly, which doesn't actually happen. Probably again when Philip and Alexander conquer Illyria and Paeonia, they install pro-Philip, pro-Alexander leaders and oust the anti-party. So I think in that sense, you've got less threat as well. But it's an interesting one in terms of why doesn't a subject people rebel when they get the chance? And when you look at Alexander, obviously it's a decade of subject, and in a way, the idea is not an erosion of patriotism, but certainly they've seen the effect. I mean, if you're an Athenian in that period, in the 330s BC, you've lost the Battle of Chaeronea. Your ally at the Battle of Chaeronea, Thebes, is then wiped from the face of the earth in 335 BC. Any thought you might have when Philip II of Macedon dies in 336 that Alexander would be a less capable opponent or a less harsh master is eliminated by his razing of Thebes. And so I think if you're an Athenian and to even conceive of the idea that Alexander might wipe Athens from the face of Hellas is unthinkable. But when he razes Thebes, storied seven-gated Thebes, hometown of Heracles, all of that, when he's willing to do that to Thebes, well, why wouldn't he do it to Athens? What's stopping him from doing it to Athens? And so I think that inherent threat is there. There are, of course, pro-Macedonian politicians in Athens throughout this period, just as there are a growing number of anti-Macedonian politicians. They, of course, are rounded up and either exiled or executed at the end of the Lamian War as well. But I think it's an interesting one. Obviously, Athens always goes in cycles. There are, after the Lamian War in 321, there are still some anti-Macedonian parties who are agitating. And, my favourite story is of Phryne, the most beautiful woman in Greece, who makes so much money that she offers to pay for the rebuilding of Thebes's walls. Is it Athens's walls? Athens's walls. But she wants to put her name on them. Anyway, so I think in that sense, that's why there's this inherent threat that Alexander has followed through on once. And, you can compare it to what he does in the sieges of several of the cities in the Near East, that when he takes Tyre, Halicarnassus, and Gaza, the others follow and open their gates to him because they know what's going to come if they resist. And so I think in that sense, you've got the same pattern as what he did at Thebes. And so that's a really interesting precedent that he sets, and he follows through. So you basically oppose Alexander at your peril. So I hope that answers your question, Val. You can, of course, ask us a question yourself, and you can listen to the big podcast, which comes once a month. We're about to record one at the end of this week. That's the Ancient Warfare podcast. There's also the Ancient History podcast these days. So you can get your fix of all things ancient history and ancient warfare, if you like, right here. We will see you again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.